الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله يعلم ما تحمل كل أنثى وما تغيض الأرحام وما تزداد وكل شيء عنده بمقدار. عالم الغيب والشهادة الكبير المتعال. سواء منكم من أسر القول ومن جهر به ومن هو مستخف بالليل وسارب بالنهار. له معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه يحفظونه من أمر الله. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. وإذا أراد الله بقوم سوءا فلا مرد له وما لهم من دونه من وال. هو الذي يريكم البرق خوفا وطمعا وينشئ السحاب الثقال ويسبح الرعد بحمده والملائكة من خيفته ويرسل الصواعق فيصيب بها من يشاء وهم يجادلون في الله وهو شديد المحال. له دعوة الحق والذين يدعون من دونه لا يستجيبون لهم بشيء إلا كباسط كفيه إلى الماء ليبلغ فاه وما هو ببالغه وما دعاء الكافرين إلا في ضلال. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ra'd, verses 8 through 14, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what every female carries and what the wombs lose prematurely or what they exceed. And everything with him is due by measure. He is the knower of the unseen and the witnessed, the grand and the exalted. It is the same to him concerning you, whether one of you conceals his speech or one of you publicizes it, and whether one is hidden by night or conspicuous amongst others by day. For each one are successive angels before and behind him who protect him by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change the condition of the people until they change what is within themselves. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends for a people ill, there is no repelling it. And there is not for them, besides him, any patron or protector. It is he who shows you the lightning, causing fear and aspiration, and generates the heavy clouds. And the thunder exalts Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with praise of him, and the angels as well from fear of him. And he sends thunderbolts and strikes therewith whom he wills while they dispute about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he is severe in assault. To him alone is the supplication of truth, and those they call upon besides Allah do not respond to them with such a thing, except as one who stretches his hands towards water from afar, calling to it to reach his mouth. But it will not reach it, and the supplication of the disbelievers is not but an error. JazakAllah Khair.
JazakAllah Khair for that recitation and translation, Brother Horace. Before we begin the program, I actually like to start off with a short clip from an organization known as Human Rights Watch. Brother Imran, if you could pull that up for me.
the Turkic Muslim population of Xinjiang with disdain and hostility. It considers their distinct identity, their religion, their culture, their language, as evidence of political disloyalty, of separatism. And since the new party secretary, Chen Changuo, came to power in the region 2 years ago, the authorities have stepped up their Strike Hard campaign, which is designed on paper to eradicate terrorist threats, but in reality is being used to justify massive abuses across the region, including the establishment of political education camps in which people are forced to swear their loyalty to the party and the government. Detaining people and forcing them to go through this kind of re-education.
A family member from every family was imprisoned for no reason.
It has been 8 months since I last saw my son or heard his voice. Like that's not enough. They put my 13-year-old daughter in a political re-education camp.
Our recent research shows that life inside the political education camps and life in Xinjiang in general are actually not so very different.
They started cracking down on religion. They began detaining those wearing hijabs or those covering their faces.
They canceled teaching in Kazakh and all teaching was going to be in Mandarin. I came here so that my children won't be forced to be Chinese.
A number of scholars and journalists have described Xinjiang today as being the contemporary police state. The region is awash in security forces, in checkpoints, metal detectors. It's almost impossible to do anything outside the line of the authorities' sight.
There are so many cameras. An hour commute takes half a day because of all the checks and inspections. They check your ID and do iris checks and body checks.
Every 10 meters there is a guard. They check you so often that you barely have a chance to put your ID in your pocket. They inspect us all day long. What kind of life is that?
All right, so that should give us a good background for tonight's discussion. 1.4 million Uyghurs are currently being detained in East Turkestan concentration camps.
Your business idea needs a website.
The Chinese government would like to label it as a re-education camp, but that's the last time I will use that term for this evening. And we know that families and children and spouses are completely separated apart. Most of the time, they don't even see each other. And I know some Uyghurs personally in my community as well. They can't even get in contact with their loved ones overseas. Because if they were able to get in contact with them, whether it be WhatsApp or through a phone call, whatever it may be, the surveillance state of the Chinese government will look over the text messages, the phone calls, and anything that's suspicious. It will be deemed as something that they could justify and incarcerate them and essentially throw them into these concentration camps. The issue is ongoing, it's growing, but the world is essentially turning a blind eye to it. So we hope that this evening we can bring awareness to the issue, and two of our esteemed guests for this evening, Aydin Anwar and Dr. Kia Jahed, will be able to give us both the political perspectives and the activist perspective, and also how we can tie back to religion as well on a day-to-day basis. I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker for this evening. Aydin Anwar is an Uyghur American serving as co-chair of Save Uyghur Campaign, a campaign launched by Justice for All, a 501c3 nonprofit partner with Sound Vision. She has worked with Uyghur refugees in Turkey, raising over $100,000 for Uyghur widows and orphans. She has also spoken on multiple media outlets, with her most notable piece on Now This, receiving over 100 million views worldwide. She just graduated from Duke University last May with a major in international comparative studies. And for our second speaker this evening will be Dr. Kia Jain. He himself has been a former collegiate basketball player, a personal trainer, biomedical engineering researcher, and currently a physician practicing musculoskeletal radiology and interventions. After converting to Islam in high school, he has been passionate about Islamic studies and holistic interpretations of scripture, especially as they bear relevance to modern times. He's visited Egypt and Syria, as well as various places in America for traditional and contemporary approaches to Arabic and Islamic studies with world-renowned scholars. Also, he spent time in Turkey and Greece for comparative religious studies. He's been an active khatib, lecturer, and community activist. And with Dr. Kia, you get a 2-for-1 special. Since he played collegiate ball on the court, he can cross you up, and at the same time schedule an appointment the next day to treat your injury. So he's a 2-for-1, he's a special guy. But nonetheless, we'll go ahead and open it up with a presentation from Aydin Anwar, and we'll hand it off to you.
Hello. Assalamualaikum everyone. Good evening. I'm going to give a presentation to you all because this is an issue that many or sometimes on a narrative that we're trying to put out there, because the Chinese government right now is putting an opposite narrative, not just saying like things like, oh, the camps don't exist and whatnot, but also in terms of our history and occupation and whatnot. So before I begin my presentation, I'm just curious, because there's some of y'all are in the back. But in the meantime, I'm just curious to know, for those of you guys in this room, how many of you guys have actually heard about this issue last year at this time? Raise your hand high. Okay, so that's a good number. How many of you guys kind of knew about this issue 5 years ago? I know we were a lot younger then. Okay, look how many hands are being raised. Can everyone raise your hand high if you're 5 years ago? Okay, there's 2 hands I see raised. Anyone else? Okay, so do you see how like this is you see the discrepancy in the hands that were being raised? You could say that even today, many people wouldn't raise their hand. A lot of people have maybe heard of us very briefly on the news. And so this is a big reason why I'm going to be sharing with you all today a bit more about our narrative, and inshallah, coming out of this event, you guys can also share this information. Make sure that this conversation and this topic is something that you guys have at your dinner tables. It's something that is these conversations more normalized, because again, there's so many problems occurring in our Muslim world today. We talk about so many things, and we don't want to participate in an oppression Olympics, but again, the big reason why this is such a vital issue to be talking about is because oftentimes we have been forgotten, and it still feels that way oftentimes. So before I begin, again, I want to do a quick disclaimer that some of the information in this presentation is a little bit graphic, or it can be kind of heavy. So if you ever feel uncomfortable, you feel like you want to step out, you feel free to do so. Or if you want to interject and comment on if something's too much, let me know. But inshallah, it should be fine. Are you going to be my? Okay. Okay, so this picture here that you see right here is is it on full screen? Oh, it won't work. Okay. Can you click on this? Oh man. Oh. How about what's your, okay, that should be fine. Okay, it doesn't work, but you guys can still see it. So this painting, how many of you guys have seen this painting before? Okay, 1 person has, 2, 3. Okay, so this painting, you'll see the original photo in just a bit. It actually stems from an actual photo, and actually we just saw it in the little clip that we just played for you. And one thing that I want to emphasize about the Uyghur population, and the Uyghurs are a Turkic people, by the way, for those who do not know, and they hail from a nation called East Turkestan. And this is a nation that oftentimes you might not hear in the media being called as that. You hear it as the Xinjiang Province or the Xinjiang region. Xinjiang in Chinese actually means new territory. So that name itself sheds light on the fact that we are an occupied territory. And again, a lot of us, most people of East Turkestan reject that name. It's actually offensive when people say we're from Xinjiang, or people say we're the people of Xinjiang. The number one reason for that being is, number one, it acknowledges China's colonial rule, and I'm going to delve into the history in just a bit. And a lot of times when people hear that name, they think in fact we are Chinese. They think, because again, Xinjiang is a Chinese name, and people don't know the meaning of that. People think we're Chinese, and also the fact that this is China renamed our territory to Xinjiang, and so this is it's kind of like, you think about the analogy where, like, let's say somebody kidnaps you, and then they change your name to a name that they choose. Let's say they name you like New Property, for example, and it's in the language of your kidnapper, and then everyone who vouches for your release then calls you that name instead of calling you your original name. This is, so it's an attempt to kind of wipe out our identity as a Kurd people. So the name East Turkestan is a name that we call on everyone to use, and the name East Turkestan also implies that we are a land of the Eastern Turks. Eastern Turks meaning, so Turkestan is a region that that kind of goes through all of Central Asia. It even includes, and some people will even say it includes parts, even Turkey. Turkey is a Turkic, the people are Turkic as well. And so East Turkestan referring to the far east of that. So here is actually our national flag. It's the same exact flag as the Turkish flag, but it's light blue. And again, you won't see this flag in East Turkestan at all. Even having this flag could, you could end up in life in prison or be executed. Even the term East Turkestan, or how we call it as Sharq Turkestan, that itself is a crime as well. So a lot of people who are born and raised there have never seen this flag in their entire life, and have also never even heard the term Sharq Turkestan, unless it's behind very concrete walls, or like some type of underground effort to kind of share a little bit of our history. But oftentimes it's not until people leave the country, it's not until sometimes people leave China that they start to learn about the history of our homeland and really start to realize what has been happening. So you can just move aside. So a bit of the history, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because there's a lot to this presentation, but I also don't want to erase historical, the history behind this. So the people of East Turkestan had been living with independence for centuries until the Manchus invaded East Turkestan in 1759. The land has been a center of commerce for thousands of years. It's been a cradle of Islamic scholarship as well. Many of our ulama from way back when are actually hail from that region as well. We actually have even like the tombs and the memorials that hold a lot of our Islamic scholars from way back when. Even one of the rulers of the Qarawanian Empire from the 10th century, he is known for converting to Islam, and from that sparked the Islamization of all of Central Asia. So there's a lot of rich history there that also China is making clear attempts to erase at this point. And then it was renamed to Xinjiang in 1884 by the Chinese statesman and military leader, I can't say the name, Zhu Zhongdang of the late Qing dynasty. And then the first official Chinese invasion actually took place in 1912 after the Manchu Empire collapsed in 1911. And from that point forward, that's when you started to see Uyghurs rebel, and they established, with continuous efforts, they managed to establish the first East Turkestan Islamic Republic in 1933, and that was also shortly crushed after by the Chinese forces. And then again in 1944, it was the second East Turkestan Republic was established, and that was also 5 years later crushed when the Communist Chinese Party came to power. And since 1949, when the Communist Party came to power, the people of East Turkestan have been undergoing systematic forms of genocide, cultural genocide, and ethnic cleansing. And to this day, we see it happening in the worst forms possible. So here's a picture showing the establishment of the first East Turkestan Islamic Republic in 1933. A lot of these leaders were actually eventually killed by the Chinese state. And this is the photo showing some of the leaders of the second East Turkestan Republic in 1944. And these, again, were also leaders who were eventually punished or killed by the Chinese state. This is actually a photo of my father when he was around maybe 3 or 4 years old. Here you can see him, he's actually forced to wear the uniform by Mao Zedong. It's like a red uniform, and he's forced to carry the red book. And in this red book contained basically essays, poems, that basically written by like Mao Zedong and that praised the Communist Party. And so this is the way that like my parents grew up. They grew up basically brainwashed by the government, and this is again kind of a photo testifying to that, showing that this is what they're forced. And my dad was, his parents were forced to work in a labor camp for many years and suffered under that kind of oppression. So right now, you guys have heard, like mentioned, there's a massive network of detained internment camps and prisons. And with that, you have millions of families torn apart, including my own. A lot of my, alhamdulillah, I have immediate family members here, meaning my parents and my siblings are here. That's because I was born and raised here. But I have aunts, uncles, cousins, my mom's cousins, my mom's far relatives. We counted around 93 people who we deem as missing. Meaning, missing could mean, a lot of times missing is meaning that we cannot even contact them. We don't know if they're alive or dead. Some of them we later find out that they're actually in a concentration camp. I have a distant relative who, my aunt's brother-in-law, we found out that he passed away inside a concentration camp. It was supposedly through lethal injection. And so this is just kind of a list that I developed through Excel spreadsheet, listing out my relative, their relationship with my family, and basically their status, whether or not we've had contact with them and what we know about them. And most of them, the worst part is we actually don't know what their status is. Like, it would be best to know, okay, are they in a camp or not? We don't know. And we don't have access to that information. My father's, you can actually move on. So the list continues, like as you can see. And this is from all of my mom's side. My mom is sitting here, by the way. And this is relatives from all of my mom's side. And if you move on, it goes on to, actually my father was in the beginning. And then this got into my mom's side. So this is a picture of some of my family members. This is my dad, this is my mom, this is my aunt, my cousin, my sister. But this man right here is my dad's brother-in-law. So it's his sister's husband. And he came here in the United States in 2014. He came to the United States to kind of see if he can resettle in the States, maybe find a job. Things didn't really quite work out for him at first, and so he decided to actually go back, which we found out, which we later realized was a huge mistake, because upon his arrival at the Beijing International Airport, immediately they detained him. They put a black sack over his head, and they brought him, they detained him into a concentration camp, and since then, we don't know if he's alive or dead. We know he's in a camp in Antush, but that's all we know. And his wife and his kids were actually waiting for him outside in the airport, and he never came out. So again, this is the fate of, and his crime was that he went abroad. Because they deem going abroad as you being somehow tied to terrorist activity, or is tied to some thought that will make you into a quote-unquote terrorist, or some kind of, or being like connected to some diasporic movement that seeks independence or freedom from the Chinese state. So that was his crime, was going abroad. And to this day, his wife is actually a judge back home. She actually was vouching for his release many times, and it was not successful. This is, if you go back really quick. So again, this is, his name is Aydin. That's his name, he's detained. This gentleman right here, his name is Azad. He is living in Ashburn right now. He's my aunt's husband. His brother was also sent to a camp and sentenced to 15 years of prison because he came to the United States in 2014 to attend my cousin's wedding. He went back, and his crime again was going abroad. So that's his friend. And then this is her daughter. And her daughter also came with him to attend the wedding and see if they can resettle here. Things didn't work out as well, so they went back. She's also been in a camp for around a little over 2 years now, and again, we don't know her status. We don't know if she's alive or dead. She's actually a professional soccer player and a PE teacher. So these are ordinary people that we interact with on a daily basis, and now these people are in a massive network of camps and shrouded in secrecy. So I want to show you guys a picture showing kind of like the trajectory of how these camps have been developed. So by the way, 2016 is the year when these camps first started to become a real thing. But later documents show, there are leaked documents revealing kind of the Chinese government's intention to actually start building these network this network of detention in 2013. So President Xi Jinping, there's evidence showing that they had been planning this in advance. So this is a detention camp facility, and here you can see the size of it in 2015. And within 3 years, you can see the expansion of it. I think it looks like it's tripled in size. So this is something you can pull up on Google Earth right now through satellite imagery. I don't really have the coordinates here, but I can also send those to you if you're interested. So this is one camp complex right outside of East Turkestan that can hold up to 1 million detainees. And this camp is made so that if someone were to be in this camp and were to attempt to escape or were to manage to escape the walls, by the time they would reach any type of civilization, they would already be dead, because it's literally like in the middle of the desert. And so this is, again, something, and it started being built in 2013. So again, it shows that this stuff was planned in advance. And many people, so a lot of times the Chinese government has actually claimed that they've been releasing a lot of these people from the camps. But in reality, what is actually happening, one of the major phenomena is that they're transferring people from the camps to parts of mainland China to never be seen again. To where, we don't know exactly where, but we're assuming that this would be one of the places. And for them to, whether it be slowly meet their death or suffer in these camps. But again, these prisoners have no contact with the outside world. People cannot visit them. We don't know their situation or status. And so so how do we know exactly what's happening in these camps? Well, some people have actually been released from these camps. A lot of times, the people who have been released were actually citizens of other countries. So examples of former detainees were actually, like for example, citizens of Kazakhstan. And the government vouched for their release, and eventually they spoke out and talked about what they experienced. So what we've heard through these testimonies is that these people are subject to extreme hunger, rape, and forced sterilization. So we actually have a concentration camp survivor living here in Fairfax with her 2 kids. I don't know if you guys have heard of Mehrigo Tursun. She shared her story on national, international media outlets. And the doctor here confirmed that she can no longer have kids because they actually sterilized her in the camps. So these are like real testimonies. It wasn't until she came here that she found out that was confirmed for her. There's also more and more evidence that organ harvesting occurs in these camps and prisons. Organ harvesting meaning they take a lot of these prisoners of conscience and they take all their organs and sell them for extreme prices. And actually, a lot of times they're actually being sold to places like Saudi Arabia and other places within the black market. There's also medical experimentation. Detainees talk about being drugged with unknown substances. A lot of times these drugs would cause people to faint, pass out, sometimes even die. Sometimes these drugs would cause them to be sterilized. A lot of these drugs also cause them to lose memory, so they even forget their state of being. They don't know where they are, why they're there, and to the point where they even lose feelings. Like they lose this feeling of, like for example, they lose the ability to even miss their family. They don't know who their family is at that point. So it basically is making them into like kind of like The Walking Dead, or like kind of like a zombie in a way. This is just a way to kind of like help them get through this time, because the Chinese authorities know exactly what they're putting through, or what they're putting these people through. There's also something known as the tiger chair, which you can see an illustration of. One of the detainees talked about how he's forced to sit here for hours on end in a dark room. People have been talking about electric shock and things like being beaten to death. And I know this is really heavy, and again, these are some of countless examples of the type of torture. And Allahu Alam, we don't know what else actually occurs in these facilities, but inshallah we'll make dua for them, and this ends. So this is Mehrigo Tursun, who I mentioned to you just earlier. She actually lives in Fairfax, but she was actually living in Egypt with her husband and with her husband. She got pregnant with triplets. And after giving birth to triplets, she decided, it's a little bit too hard to raise 3 babies on her own while her husband's working. So she decides to go back to East Turkestan to have her mom help her take care of her babies. Upon her arrival, immediately, just kind of like how Ali Jan, uncle, I shared that story with you all. Upon her arrival, they immediately detain her. They take away her kids from her, take away her 3-month-old baby from her. They conduct an operation on her 3 kids, and within her detainment, they actually tell her, oh, one of your children is actually very sick. She goes out, and essentially her baby eventually dies. She says, what happens to my kid? They don't answer. They say nothing. They wouldn't tell her why. They wouldn't tell her why they operated on her kids. If you actually meet her kids now, you can actually see the scar on their neck. And she was basically detained a total of 3 times. In those periods of detention, she talks about the torture she endured. And I'm not going to talk, basically I kind of already walked through some of the torture she went through, but I'm going to point out to you one story that she shared that was really profound and really kind of shed light on how horrific the types of reasons people were sent to this camp. So basically, I'm not going to read through word for word, but basically she says how within her cell that she was detained, there was around 68 women in her tight cell. And during this period of time, within 3 months, 9 women died. And one of the women who had, that she recounts was a 23-year-old woman who was sent to the camp because she attended a wedding that was deemed Islamic, meaning there was no alcohol, there was no dancing and music and whatnot. And because of that, all 400 people who attended that wedding was then sent to a camp. So during this time, and when she was detained, they took her, she was in the field with her 2 kids. They just snatched her away from her kids, and because she was agonizing about the whereabouts of her kids, eventually the stress got to her and she passed out, and the authorities just took her away. So again, this is I think one of the deaths that she includes in her, and she talks about how she never saw this woman again. So. There's also an attempt to destroy Uyghur intellectuals, or basically any type of Uyghur influence in society. So including academics, presidents of universities, they are also disappearing on mass scale. So imagine if the president of this university just disappeared with no known crime, just simply because they are of a certain ethnicity and exert a certain type of influence in society. So these are 4 individuals that I'm including here. So we have the president of the Xinjiang Medical University who was given a death sentence. I'm just going to give you an example, and the rest you can kind of read here. This is kind of the Uyghur version of our Justin Bieber. His name is Ablajan Ayub. He is a pop star, a singer back home, and he actually disappeared in 2018. We still don't know his whereabouts, we don't know how he is. And what's interesting is that a lot of his music actually tried to reconcile and promote ethnic unity between Uyghurs and Han Chinese. And some of his music actually used Chinese language, and he was still detained. So this is kind of a picture that you can see showing a little bit of the past and present of a very active, what's supposed to be an active and famous bazaar. Usually every Sunday, it's pretty full and it's full of life, and now you see these areas as deserted and empty. And also a lot of homes have been shut down. You can see when you go through neighborhoods, the locks are on it. The Chinese government has confiscated these homes as well. Restaurants have been closed down because there's no one there to operate it, and it's mainly because of this massive detention network. And so a lot of times what's happening in these camps, they lead to death. Sometimes a lot of times they're obviously targeted with the specific intention of killing the detainees. And what's happening is that actually they built cremation facilities to cremate the body in order to hide the evidence of bodies coming out of these camps. They oftentimes do not send the bodies to the families to have a proper Islamic funeral. And this is another way to subvert the Islamic tradition of burying the body and keeping it sacred. So here's a tweet shared out by a prominent journalist. Her name is Emily Fang. She shared a picture of one of the hometowns of East Turkestan, and showing how a lot of these streets have now been deserted, even shops and closed down. And she talks about how residents say that around 70 to 80% of adults are in some form of detention. And like our brother Fawad mentioned before, a lot of the children, a lot of these families are separated. So what happens to the children of these detainees is that they're sent, oftentimes they're sent to orphanages, or what China calls as kindergartens. They said these are basically just daycares, and they're just a way to kind of, where we're taking care of them in the meantime, but essentially these are orphanages. These are orphanages while the children's parents are actually still alive in the concentration camps. A lot of times the parents don't know where their kids are, the kids don't know where their parents are, and they're stuck in these closed barbed wire facilities, and also being subject to things similar to what their parents are going through. So they're actually being brainwashed from a young age, taught to hate their own religion, identity, forced to speak Chinese, and essentially going through that whole indoctrination, brainwashing process. So here's a picture showing some of the traditional Uyghur outfit that maybe a kid would wear if he's about to dance, he or she is about to dance. And here is a picture showing them now being forced to wear basically Confucian clothing, which, by the way, a lot of Han Chinese kids wouldn't even have to wear. So this is just their way of forcing that culture upon them and changing their identity. And there's more and more evidence showing forced interethnic marriages between Uyghur women and Han men. So here are pictures showing that, and you can see some of the faces of these women don't seem to be really happy. And a lot of times these women are actually threatened, and they say that if you do not marry an Uyghur man, a Han Chinese man, your family will be sent to a camp, or if they're already in a camp, then we will release them. So these women are coerced, and now there's more evidence talking about how there have been offices established in these camps to basically have Chinese men come into these camps and pick out Uyghur girls to marry. And now, when we talk about surveillance, one of the ways that China surveils is not just through the cameras and through these massive technology, units, but it's also through surveillance within your own home. So one of the ways is through what they call family unity program. What essentially that is they force Chinese government officials to live inside your home to make sure you're not engaging in religion, to assess your political views. And now there actually is more evidence talking about how they're forced to sleep on the same bed as the Uyghur women while their husbands are in concentration camps. So what does that sound like to you? Sounds like state-sponsored rape, essentially. And a lot of times these people the officials are pretending to be friends with them. They're trying to establish cordial ties, where in reality they're basically asking them questions. They'll do things to test like how their response would be. For example, if they would offer a resident a cigarette, see how they would respond. If they flinch or if they say no thank you, that's a sign that they should be sent to a camp, because their refusal is probably due to religion. And again, this is a sign that they've been quote unquote infected with an ideological virus that needs to be cleansed from their brains. And these are exact words used by the Chinese government to justify detaining these millions of people in this camp network. And given all this, we can effectively say that practicing Islam is effectively forbidden. I'm talking about in every way possible, even to the point where saying Assalamu alaikum could lead to like 10 years of prison. So you cannot say Assalamu alaikum, you cannot even say the word God. So you know how we say Inshallah, or God willing, we cannot say Allah. So now, instead of saying Inshallah, or in the Uyghur language, we would say Khudayi Bursa, right? We would have to replace the term God with the term CCP or Xi Jinping. So God, they're making us replace God with Xi Jinping. So we would, instead of saying Inshallah, we would say Insha Xi Jinping, or Xi Jinping Bursa. That's how the language has changed. And even when people in our community have died, and sometimes we manage to send a message, we cannot say, may Allah grant them Jannah. We would have to say, may they rest in a good place. So we omitted the term God and Jannah in that sentence alone. So here are examples of people who've been targeted due to their religious activity. This man was sentenced to 10 years of, I think this was 16 years or 10 years, I forgot. 10 or 16 years for having a Quran recitation on his phone, like an audio file. This woman was sentenced for 10 years for encouraging her friend to wear the hijab, the headscarf. There was a man who was sentenced to 6 years of prison because he refused to shave his beard. This man, he's a famous philanthropist back home. He's also known to be pretty wealthy as well. He was sentenced to death for going on a quote-unquote unsanctioned trip to Hajj, and then they also seized over $1 million of his assets and killed, I think, either his mother or his wife, or both. I'm forgetting which one, but they killed one of them in prison as well. Then you have overt destruction of religious sites. This is actually showing a picture of a mosque that was transformed into a bar. So you can see that. This is another masjid that was destroyed in 2017. Another one that was destroyed as well. And now you can see a lot of the, on Google Earth, you can actually use the time, the year to see what the difference was. And when you do your research, you can see a lot of the masjids that were once there have now demolished the ground. It's not there anymore. Okay, so I've been speaking for a while now, and I'm gonna try to wrap it up a little bit and try to summarize. There's still a lot more to share, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna try to close off. But I wanted to shed light a bit more on why this is happening. So I want to just out of curiosity, how many of you guys, or who, can someone guess as to why this is happening? I would say the underlying cause.
Money.
Okay, money.
I think the Silk Road routes through your province.
Okay, the Silk Road route. Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Could someone say one word, just one word that could describe it? Power. Okay. What do you guys think is the prime reason people are being sent to the camps? Islam. Okay. Okay. So it's an interesting question because I always get a lot of different responses, and you guys are all right to a certain extent. There is, I would say, the underlying reason is actually territory. This is a part of an ongoing occupation, and this is something, again, that's not emphasized enough. The territory, because it's occupied, this region is also very rich in minerals and resources. So again, it ties back to your answer about money, the Silk Road route. And without this land, essentially, so I don't know how many of you guys have heard of the One Belt, One Road initiative? Okay, only 2 of you guys. Okay, so essentially this is a multi-trillion-dollar initiative started by the Chinese government in 2013. Essentially, their goal is to basically build this entire network of railroads, pipelines that extends through Central Asia, Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, and so on, basically connecting the entire world to this system where basically a lot of the countries that it goes through will then be indebted to China through the type of economic help that it's giving to the countries going through it. So for example, Pakistan is a huge country that benefits from this initiative. Turkey as well, places in Africa. So a lot of times if you go to Pakistan nowadays, I don't know if some of you guys have been there recently, but there are certain parts of Pakistan where they have just Chinese signs. It looks like it's part of China. And they're slowly trying, this is a form of colonialism. We're telling people China is slowly trying to kind of take over part of your country essentially, and we're warning people that this is not a good thing because they may be helping these countries economically, but essentially what's happening is that they're becoming indebted to China, honestly indefinitely in these cases, and in return China is expecting something. So there's actually talk about how a lot of thousands of Han citizens are actually moving to places outside of China to settle there. So we have actually Han Chinese people living in parts of Pakistan, slowly trying to establish their lives there, and parts of Africa as well, and so on. So this is a huge initiative, and as you can see, much of it actually goes through the East Turkestan region. So without the region, this initiative would suffer on major terms as well. So again, this is money, but I would say this is mainly due to territory, is their attempt at trying to maintain tight control over the mineral-rich land in order to, and they see our culture and our identity, because we are visibly and culturally not Chinese, they see our existence as a threat to their ability to maintain tight control over the region. It's very visible that we are not Chinese, and so their attempt to kind of homogenize us to the rest of China is, again, their attempt of just trying to say that we're all one people, we're all Han Chinese, and this is our land, and these people just don't exist. In the beginning, they didn't really have these overt attempts to get rid of our culture, but they've now realized that homogenizing all of China is their solution to maintaining the minerals and the wealth present in our region. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the topic of what you can do to help. This is a big topic. The answers can be endless. You guys are also students and we're all creative. I've had people come up to me giving me amazing ideas on what they can do to help. So the number one thing is to raise awareness. I think this is still something that not a lot of people talk about, right? And even having this event is one of those of action items. So JazakAllah Khair for the MSA for organizing this. But in terms of policy, so we have something called the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. How many of you guys have heard of it? Okay, 1, 2, maybe a few hands I see. This is a bill that was introduced to Congress, and in September the House passed it, and then later in the year the Senate was passed it as well, but the issue was that the House actually amended the bill a little bit, so now it has to go back to, I'm sorry, the Senate passed it in September, and then the House, and then there was a slight amendment, so now it has to go back to the Senate, and it's just a little bit messy now, but right now we're calling on people to call on their senators to support the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, and the new version of the bill. So you can actually, so if you guys pull up your phones and go to your camera, if you scan this, immediately we'll link you to a site that will make it super easy for you to contact your senators. You don't even have to find the phone number of your senator or anything. It literally, you put in your zip code, it tells you who your senator is in case you guys don't know, and it will actually give you an email template so that you can just put your email in it, and it'll immediately send an email to them, and you can also call them as well. So if you guys have free time, you can also leave a message to the office and go from there. But you can see also which senators have co-sponsored, haven't co-sponsored, and that whole website has a whole list of tools that you can use, also reports and things that you guys can follow up on, and other projects to follow.
Right, and just to clarify, so it already passed the House, but it needs to go through the Senate again?
It needs to go through the Senate again. And then once that goes to the Senate, then it can go to Trump's desk, and then hopefully, inshallah, get signed. But now it's a little bit, China and US's relationship is now getting a little, I guess they're warming up to each other again, and so, but in the meantime, we can do what we can to change it. And so one of the campaigns that we've actually been talking about, people actually talk about this a lot, is just similar to BDS and the campaign to boycott Israel. Why don't we boycott China? The question is for this, it's just that China is, everything is made in China, right? So it's I dare you guys, or this is a challenge for you guys, go to the store next time you go shopping, see if you can just avoid picking up things made in China. It's a challenge, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for the effort. But seriously, it's something that we all have to train ourselves to do, because it's hard, but this is economically the reason why China is so is able to do all the things that they're doing now is because of economics. They're actually buying other countries' silence right now, through the money and through the economic help that they're giving to other countries, including Muslim majority countries. So a lot of these countries that you think would speak up for us, they've been silent, or they've been pressured by China to remain silent through money. So this is a campaign that Justice for All launched early this summer during Ramadan. Was in addition to fasting from food and water, why don't we also fast from China? So fast from products made in China, and so on. And this is again kind of an extension of that campaign. During the holiday season, we called on people to basically avoid buying things made in China. And if you were to pick up something that was made in China that you wanted to buy, take a picture of it and share it on your social media saying that you're not going to buy it. And this is another way to raise awareness. And now there's actually, I forgot to mention this, there's massive, in these camps, now people are actually being forced to work in factories as modern day slaves, either for zero pay or very, very little pay, and they cannot go home to their families at the end of the day. So we have this network of forced labor that is happening in these camps, and we actually have stores here in America that often are selling these clothing. So 80% of China's cotton actually comes from the East Turkestan region, and around 30% of the cotton here in the United States is made in China. So if you kind of do the math, you can think there's a high chance that the cotton that you're wearing, if you bought it from here, was actually made by modern day slaves if you bought your clothing recently. So this is, again, a way for us to be aware and be mindful when we shop the next time. So these are some of the companies that we that have shown evidence of acquiring some of these clothing and fabrics from forced labor camps. So it includes H&M, Adidas, Uniqlo. I've never shopped here before, but they actually had a brand called Xinjiang Cotton as one of their clothing names. Some of these, if you guys recognize, you can make a note of it. Muji as well. And Target was actually caught with it as well, but then apologized and said that they're not going to be selling anything from that region. And Costco was also caught with selling baby pajamas that were made inside forced labor camps, and we had a campaign for them to remove it and apologize and promise not to sell anything like that again, and to be very mindful of where they're sourcing their clothing from. So these are some projects that have been established by, actually this one was actually started by one of my friends. The campaign was to basically put up stickers on random places to telling people to Google Uyghurs. This is their way of trying to raise awareness, because most people, again, don't even know who we are. So if you Google it, you'll learn. So you can, go to the next slide. You can see I had some friends, they were putting up at different parts of the city. So this is in New York City, where they put it on like a subway map, and then this other thing right here, I don't know what that is. Okay, I don't know if this is actually legal, but like be careful if you're putting up the stickers, because one of my friends actually got arrested, not arrested, but like she got like ticketed because she put it on a place that she wasn't supposed to be, and I think refused. But just to sum it up, just be careful with where you're putting it up, but like obviously at a place where you can put up stickers. But this was also posted inside a subway like thing, and yeah. Move on a little bit. Okay, and this is one more thing that I wanted to mention before I close off. So the coronavirus that has been flooding the news recently and is infecting thousands and thousands of people worldwide, I want to mention one thing, is that one of the major concerns regarding this issue is the idea that this virus, if once it gets into Turkestan, and it already has, there's been already more than 40 confirmed cases in the region. If this manages to get inside one of the camps or prisons, it's basically game over for people in those camps. It will spread like this, and the conditions are made so that these people's immune systems are already so low. They're facing hunger. They have absolutely no system in place to protect themselves and to keep themselves healthy. So if this virus spreads again, this could be basically a massive wiping out of our people physically as well. So we have a campaign to basically call on the World Health Organization to send delegates to East Turkestan to assess the outbreak in the region and to go inside the camps and really set up necessary medical personnel or medical equipment to prevent the outbreak. But not only that, is most importantly pressure China to close the camps. Like, these camps don't exist for any good reason. It's only for the most evil, sinister reason. And so we're hoping that the World Health Organization can actually use this chance to really, stop a major human right violation, in addition to also protecting people from being infected by this really deadly virus and go from there. So this is something that, again, a lot of people don't know about. We're talking about coronavirus. We're seeing so many videos and so many horrifying stories, but like, the worst part about all this is that we don't know the extent of the outbreak in our own region and how this can affect people. And I also do want to mention something, that there's been a lot of, when the coronavirus first started being known to people, China actually canceled all of the flights coming out of Wuhan domestically, but the only two flights that they allowed to remain open was a flight to Urumqi, which is the capital of East Turkestan, and to the capital of Tibet. So they're basically allowing people to, if they want, take the virus to these regions where where a lot of the people who are living there are Uyghurs and Turkic people or Tibetans. So again, we suspect that this is also another way to kind of expedite our removal in the Chinese, within China. So here is the campaign, and we ask you to raise awareness on this campaign. There's a hashtag that we want you guys to use called Hutu Urumqi, WHO standing for World Health Organization, Urumqi being the capital of East Turkestan. And I had a list of steps that I wrote out, but I basically summed it up to you all. And if you guys go on World Health Organization, there's a contact information, there's a contact way to contact them. You can easily send an email or call them. It takes 2 minutes of your time, and it might seem like a lot sometimes when you're overwhelmed, but honestly, those 2 minutes would mean so much, given that this is a really dire issue. Okay, and then one last thing. Given that we are university students, I think one of the ways that we can actually affect change is within our universities themselves. Again, this is an event that does exactly that, raising awareness, but also you'd be surprised to see how many universities are so tightly tied with the Chinese government or China, or they also run Confucius Institutes in their universities. So. And as a result of that, you actually have the Chinese government actually forcing these universities to do things that comply with the government. And given this, we actually asked a lot of these universities, a lot of us have been forming projects to ask the university to divest from Chinese companies, divest from Chinese institutions, and really block ties with them, because again, this is another way to kind of continuously be part of this genocide. One of these universities that's really known is MIT. They've actually partnered with 3 surveillance technology companies that is in charge of surveilling the Turkic people living in East Turkestan. And so one of our campaigns is actually to stop MIT, raise awareness on what they're doing and shame them as a result. So MIT is one of those projects that we've been focusing on. But there are so many universities out there. I'm not really aware of George Mason's close ties with China, but I'm sure there is some type of relationship. And if you ask your university to speak out against what's happening, there's a high chance that they're probably going to say no, or they're going to remain silent about it. Do you guys have a hand?
Can you expand on, we have a Confucius Institute.
Yeah.
What are the ties of Confucius Institute?
So the Confucius Institutes, oftentimes they exist to basically foster and promote Chinese culture and the language. And there's nothing wrong with that, to learn another culture, but the problem is that oftentimes the Confucius Institutes are also controlled by the Chinese government. And so if you were to ask the Confucius Institute to host an event like this, it would probably be forbidden, right? Or to even talk about a lot of the issues that China, that's within China. If you mention concentration camps, if you mention human rights violations, they're not going to mention it, and they're going to say that that's an internal issue and it's not your business. Our whole purpose is to promote our culture and language and whatnot. But that's part of the problem, and that also ties to the university's complicitness in the whole thing. So even if you guys have an East Asian department here, or a Chinese department?
No, you mentioned that, if I'm not mistaken, I think we do have a Confucius statue.
Yeah,
on campus.
also Confucius Institute.
Yeah. But let's say you were to have an East Asian department. Some schools have that. You can talk to the professors there, ask them to make this topic into an issue being talked about in class. Some professors actually, I'm sorry to be cynical, but a lot of them will feel uncomfortable talking about it if their money and their job is reliant on remaining silent on this issue. I will share one thing. There's a Muslim chaplain that I found out who, one of the students actually brought up the idea of hosting an event on the Uyghurs, and the Muslim chaplain said that we shouldn't host this event because it's going to hurt Chinese people's feelings, and we don't want to be a political organization. So she was threatened. Her job was basically reliant on her on basically saying no, and yeah. So this actually exists, and I'm hoping to actually talk to this person soon and really sit down with them and talk about how serious of an issue this is. Even Muslim chaplains are supposed to represent the Muslim needs of people in the Muslim needs in the community and talk about plights of our community. And if they're not doing that, then that's a major problem. So I'm just shedding light on how administrations also silent students on genocides that exist. So, and again, to wrap it up, this is a website that you guys can visit. It's saveuyghur.org. That's also where you can find the tool that I sent you. It has different tabs that you can access, containing information, resources, campaigns, contact information. We're still developing it, and if you guys have any questions or ideas, feel free to come up to me afterwards, and we'd be happy to. And we can also amplify it for you through the website and through our social media as well. And inshallah, I'm gonna wrap it up there. And JazakAllah Khair for listening this much. I think I spoke a lot, but inshallah, it was informative for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Aydin. We really appreciate the presentation, the powerful stories, your personal stories that you shared. It had a great impact on me personally, and I'm sure when you keep on doing this, it hopefully spreads the message, and inshallah it creates that emotional attachment with it too, to look out for our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan. By the way, if anybody has any questions or comments, we are going to be passing around index cards in a little bit, so any questions regarding the presentation with the PowerPoint, or any questions with Dr. Kia's part, Omar should be passing around the index cards in a little bit, so please write down your questions, hold on to your thoughts, because we will have a Q&A session, inshallah. Well, the next part of the presentation, we'll go over to Dr. Kia. We're going to kind of get the Islamic perspective of all this and how we can tie this all together. The biggest part that I took away from this presentation was how repression evolves and how it conforms to the times that we live in. Because right now, the Chinese government is using artificial intelligence and facial recognition to record its citizens in a register on an online machine, and also with the management of big data. You know, the perpetuating nature of this state surveillance that exists in China is something that is normalized, to the point where I was reading personal experiences of those who left the concentration camps on how, like, the bathrooms are being monitored. No privacy, no space whatsoever to even do the most private aspects of your life. So this type of oppression we've never seen in our lifetime because of the advancement of technology and so forth. But I want to bring it back to the roots. I want to bring it back to the foundations of our religion, and how the oppressed Muslims of Mecca at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ reacted to the oppression that they faced and the struggles that they faced and identified with. So what are some key takeaways that we can attribute from the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to our time, and take away something that we can hopefully utilize in our day-to-day lives?
First of all, JazakAllah Khair to the MSA for hosting this event, and to Sister Aydin for that amazing presentation, for coming all the way down here to educate us, teach us, share with us some of these really powerful insights and experiences. Like, if you don't feel right now as a Muslim a sense of just hurt and dread, there's something wrong, right? And you know, like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "Man lam yahtam bi amri al-muslimin falaysa minhum." Whoever doesn't care about what's happening to the Muslims is not from the Muslims, right? Whoever doesn't care about what's happening to the Muslims is not from the Muslims. So, that was really profound. And you know, about the question, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the Meccan period, there's similarities. There's a lot of differences as well, and there's similarities. But you had at that time companions being tortured. You know, people who were essentially owned. It sounds similar, but people who were essentially owned by Meccans, like Bilal radiallahu anhu, tortured to the point of trying to give up their religion, stuff that happens in these concentration camps. To the extent that people like Sumayya, you know, were killed, and Khabbab ibn Arrat radiallahu anhu, he goes to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he says, "Won't you make dua for us? Won't you do something? Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us." And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, essentially he says, you know, that the meaning of what he says, I'll tell you what he says here in a second, but that if you're a person of Iman and a person of faith, you're going to be put to trials, right? And it's going to be difficult. Do people consider that they can just say, we believe, and they won't be put to a test? Fitna is to take gold or to take metal and just heat it up to remove all of its impurities, right? And so Rasulullah at that point tells Khabbab, there were people before you who had faith. And they would come, people in power would come with metal combs, right? A comb made of metal. And they would comb the skin off of their body. And these people would not give up their faith, right? And essentially, at that time, because the Muslims were weak, at that time, the most important thing was to develop patience, right? And the capacity to take what was being thrown at them, because they didn't have the ability to fight back. But there comes a point, right, when you're stronger and you have capacity and you have ability. And at that point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted the Muslims the ability to fight back. And so now, when you look at the situation, it's not appropriate to say, be patient. Because it's not just the Uyghur Muslim, there's the whole ummah. And the whole ummah has the ability to fight back, right? Now, it may not be taking arms, it may be fighting through various means, it may be fighting politically, it may be fighting through boycott, it may be fighting through voice. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "Man ra'a minkum al-munkiran falyughayyirhu biyadihi." Whoever amongst you sees a wrong, change it with his hand. If you can't change it with your hand, fabilisani, change it with your tongue, right? A lot of these advertisements, a lot of these campaigns is changing things with our tongues, right? And now, like, we shouldn't look at the situation like, okay, they have to be patient. No, it's not like that. We're an ummah. We are an ummah. And we have to be there for each other, right? To have each other's back. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Mathalul mu'minin," the example of people of iman, fi tarahumihim, and how they're merciful towards one another, right? Wa tawaddihim, how they love one another. Wa ta'atufihim, and how they're compassionate. Atuf is also like, there's a sense of like emotional intelligence that like you can empathize, right? You can actually feel what it's like for someone else to be in difficulty, right? Muslims are supposed to have that sense of emotional intelligence, right? Mathalul Jahed, the example of that and how they have this sense of togetherness is the example of a body. إذا اشتكى منه عضو تداعى له سائر الجسد بالسهر والحمى. If one part of the body complains with pain, the whole rest of the body keeps you up at night. You can't sleep. You have a fever, right? And so, to me, that's the lesson, is that when the ummah, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when the Muslims were weak, he told them to be patient, right? And maybe for those Muslims right now, there is a sense of, okay, they have to be patient, maybe they can't fight. But as an ummah, right now, we don't have to be patient, right? أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا. This ayah in Surah Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the moment when the ummah became strong. And when the ummah became strong, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, now you have permission to fight, right? And so the question now is, how do you fight? How do you resist? How do you, show effort and try? Because you can't take up arms, right? So what do? Right? And that's what the sister's presentation towards the end was all about, Writing to your senator is a part of that, Boycotting Chinese products is your personal jihad, maybe, right? And so on and so forth. So I think, we have to be careful about this whole be patient. No, there's a time for that, but there's also a capacity for us to do something in however fashion that we can.
Absolutely. And the big thing about the ummah that you mentioned is that I'm sure if you explain the stories in the presentation that you just presented, a lot of people will be on board with it. Obviously, there's an oppression occurring, but the thing is being hidden, and it's not being advertised or told properly. Now, the big thing is, we mentioned the economic aspect of it, of why Muslim leaders are failing to address this issue. Now, are they part of the blame too? Like, is there don't our leaders reflect us? Is there a way that we could hold them accountable for not speaking out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Muslim quote unquote leaders, like presidents of Muslim countries, they're not really our leaders, right? Our leaders are people who we make leaders. These are people who have creative voice. These are people who have the ability to speak the truth. These are people who are not afraid to stand up in the face of injustice, you know? And in this democratized world that we live in, this global village that we live in, it's easy for us to kind of raise up our own leaders, right? And just kind of bypass the puppet governments that, you know, are quote unquote supposed to represent us, because they don't represent us, right? They don't represent our interests. They don't represent Muslim interests, right? How many Muslim quote unquote presidents or people in power do you hear right now talking about the plight of the Uyghur people? I mean, you don't hear any of that, right? And so we have to establish our own definition of leadership, and we have to carry that own narrative and not allow people who are kind of, you know, placed there at our behest to kind of make those decisions for us. So yeah, they're responsible because they're in that position, but it doesn't end there, right? We still have to, we're still responsible too, right? فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Allah says in the Quran, be conscientious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the best you can. The best you can, right? And that's, you know, because it's often a scapegoat thing, like someone will be like, well, it's the president's job, right? No, I mean, you're still responsible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what you were able to do. If you were able to raise $1, if you were able to pass out one flyer, if you were able to go to one event, right? And you did, you're still responsible for that. Our religion is all about effort. It's not about, you know, the end result is with Allah. You know, you're always thinking about the end. You know, Islam places a lot of value on the means, which is you, which is the effort that you make, which is the sa'i, the trying, right? You know, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, مَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Whatever I told you to do, just do it to the best of your ability, right? And that's all you're going to be asked about on the Day of Judgment. Did you try? Right? Because Allah didn't create you perfect, right? And so don't put the blame on leaders. You know what Shaitan is going to say on the Day of Judgment? فَلَا تَلُومُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Don't blame me, blame yourselves. Right? Just go blame yourself. That's what he's going to say on the Day of Judgment. Because that's what we want him to be like, oh, it's his fault, it's his fault, you know. And it is. But we should still be thinking, what can I do? Don't let that become a scapegoat.
Absolutely. Aydin, did you have anything to add to that in regards to the response from Muslim leaders around the world?
Yeah, so this has been something that, if you talk to a lot of the Uyghur community about the sentiments that they're feeling, they'll also often talk about the kind of neglect that we feel in the Muslim world. We're not just talking about from a leadership position, like obviously when politics come into play, politics is dirty, it's never clean, you know, everything is about the interests of their people, their country oftentimes, and so even when it comes to speaking out against China, oftentimes they're not going to do so because that will put their own economic benefit at risk. So an example is, for example, Pakistan. Imran Khan was asked, you know, what is your stance on what China is doing to the Uyghur people? And he goes in response, oh, I actually don't know what's happening there. Like, he just tried to basically pretend like he doesn't know what's happening, which is a really bad move on a president of a country, saying that you don't know about like a mass internment network of, you know, over 1 million people in the country right next to you. But my point is, even when that was brought up to him, he then kind of played it off and said, oh, China is a really good friend of ours, and so on. And later on, he basically low-key admitted, like, you know, we can't really say anything because we're so reliant on China that we can't speak up. So Pakistan is only one of many countries that are also subject to this kind of pressure. So one thing that I learned as even doing this activism, you know, I would also get really jaded and frustrated that these Muslim countries aren't speaking up. But at the end of the day, what I realized is that we can't rely on these leaders. Like you mentioned, you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to us, and really I mean, it's also like everything happens at the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I also say it comes down to us individually as well. I actually, you know, one of my experiences recently was when I actually was invited to speak at ICNA Mass last December, so 3 months ago. And it was like a 9-hour trip for me, and we were basically the Uyghurs in the LA area tried to actually ask the MS if they could include a session on the Uyghur people. And this was kind of put together last minute, and I agreed to go. And Mass also agreed to add on a session and whatnot. But then I thought to myself, like, okay, I'm like thinking, oh wow, the Uyghurs are, you know, they're managed to put something together. But then in my head I was like, these institutions should be reaching out to Uyghur people first and asking and telling them we want to organize an event about the plight of your people, you know, because we talk about, you know, we mention a lot of other countries and their plights, but like, what about the East Turkestanis, you know, like it's frustrating. We talk about Palestine so much, and then it's like, okay, what about another country that's also enduring what you can argue to be worse, you know, like, I'm not trying to play the oppression Olympics, but it's like, it is being a part of that population. It's very frustrating when you see how much, you feel how much you're suffering, and then the Muslim community just doesn't seem to be institutionally putting you as the institutions continuously putting you on the sidelines. So I talked about, so when I arrived at the session, at the convention, the audience was pretty much empty. There was like maybe 20-25 people. The room was pretty empty. It's not like this. I mean, obviously this event is pretty empty, but it's not because of you guys, it's not your fault or anything. But what's frustrating was that it was a Muslim convention where there are thousands of people walking outside the halls trying to figure out which session that they're trying to go to. And I'm sitting there looking at an empty room. And half of the people there were actually Uyghurs who drove out 60 miles to come out and support me. Like, they already know the situation. They don't need to be sitting there listening, right? But like, and then I don't, you guys know there's an actor from the show Arturo, Abdurrahman Al. He actually sat one of the front rows to show his support. He doesn't even understand English, and he was sitting there because he wanted to show that he supported. And I was like, I appreciated people coming out to support, but that wasn't the main point. It's not about me. But it was frustrating to look at the room and be like, where is the Muslim community? You know, and also it was placed at the worst timing. It was like at 8:45 p.m. on Thanksgiving evening, right? And so that's why I didn't want to really blame people themselves for not showing up, but it's also like the institution for not really prioritizing and putting it on, for example, in the main hall where there are hundreds and hundreds of people sitting there. They're putting it in a simultaneous session with many others alongside. And so I ended up writing a post on this on Facebook, and I think a lot of people ended up seeing it and, you know, really reflected on it and was like, dang, like, we need to really step up our game. But you know, this is kind of the story for a lot of other parallel populations as well. I remember talking to Brother Hissam Eidosh, I think he's a director of CARE in LA. He talked about how in 2012, I think, when it came to raising awareness for the Syrians, they felt the same way. It felt like they were trying so hard to insert themselves in these spaces and really make their issue known. And it wasn't until later when the Syrian issue started to become on the front lines. But this is exactly kind of what we're going through now. And unfortunately, like, even when I go around speaking at events, the room is like basically empty like this. And again, it's not your fault. I'm not trying to bash you. I just want to make that clear. So, because this is not like, this is all also, but like the convention one, for me, it felt different because I feel like people had the choice, you know? And if they look at the agenda, they can easily be like, oh, I don't know anything about this issue, let me come and learn and see what I can do to help. But because that didn't happen, also because institutionally we felt like this, again, this wasn't initiated by them, this was initiated by Uyghurs. So these are just examples in our community, or even in khutbahs, when imams give a dua or make dua at the end of their khutbahs and they start listing out specific countries to make dua for, oftentimes we're sitting there, we're waiting to hear that they'll at least mention East Turkestan or the Uyghurs, and there's absolutely no mention of it. Not because they don't care about it, the imams oftentimes, they actually just don't know. They just don't know enough, and it's just not enough of a topic to really include. So sometimes they say Palestine, Syria, Kashmir, and then they say fi kulli makan, you know, and it includes them, but it's like, you know, sometimes it's a little frustrating on us. We're like, okay, like, when are they going to start including our name, you know, given what's happening? So I'm just kind of spreading some insight onto like some of the frustrations that as a community we've been facing. in terms of even the neglect that we feel in the Muslim community. And JazakAllah Khair once again for organizing this event. This is one of those events that make us not feel neglected and rather feel like this issue is so important to the point where, you know, we're sitting here on a Thursday evening, you know, trying to learn more.
Absolutely. And the first step is to invite you to the table, right? Because
Yeah,
that's where the conversation begins, and we hope to spread that conversation and people learn from it as well. I did see that post on social media, and I remember looking at the room and I was reflecting. I was like, wow, look at how our Muslim community is really backing our Muslim brothers and sisters in East Turkestan. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. You do not know what's going on. You just simply want to do something else that's more important.
So when we talk about political leaders, I'm like, before we talk about leaders, let's talk about our community, like the people around us right now. And that's the main point that I make.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Dr. Kia, I want to actually flip it this time. So we talked about like responding to injustice, how to deal with the oppression. Now, the individual that kind of wants to isolate themselves from society, be like, hey, I don't want to deal with anything that's going on. I just got to worry about myself and like no one else. I have to worry about and taking care of myself, worrying about growing, whatever it may be, and essentially just isolating from the community. Is that something that's, where does that come from? Is that even mentioned in the Sira or in the
You know, I mean, that comes from just self-centeredness. And, you know, the beautiful ayah in the Quran where that talks about the immigrants, the muhajirun, coming to Medina and not having food, not having shelter, not having family, having left all of that, having been tortured. You know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the sentiment of the people of Medina who had to host these people and take all of their interests in mind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. These people, Allah praised them. He said, they prefer them over themselves, even though they had a greater need, maybe. وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ, right? So they preferred them over themselves. That's the sentiment of Iman. The real sentiment of Iman is that you prefer your Muslim brother or sister over yourself, right? The believers are brothers and sisters. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, right? Allah says in the Quran, إِخْوَةٌ, literally, we're brothers and we're sisters. I know that sounds somewhat ideal, right? But sometimes we need to be reminded of the ideal so we can take the real and at least elevate it up just a little bit, right? So this sense of self-centered, and also keep something in mind. There's a principle in our deen. Allah will be with you as you are with the ummah. You know how there's a golden rule. Do unto others as you wish what? Others to do unto you, right? Well, there's a prophetic rule too. And the prophetic rule is do unto the ummah and do unto the creation as you wish Allah to do unto you. That's the prophetic rule, right? Because Allah will be with you as you are with the rest of humanity, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wallahu fi awni al-abdi, ma dama al-abdu fi awni akhi. Allah's gonna help you as long as you're helping your Muslim brother and sister, right? In tansurullah yansuru. If you help the cause of God, Allah's gonna help you. There's gonna come a time you need help. And if all you were worried about was yourself all your life, is if you just thought you were the center of the universe all of your life, nothing else mattered. Oh, those people, I don't know who they are, I don't speak their language, I don't understand what's going on. I have my own things to deal with, right? Well, there's gonna come a time you're gonna wish someone was worried about your situation. It's the law of reciprocity, right? And so we have to keep that in mind, right? And we have to keep this idea of ithar in mind, because this is very much a part of Iman.
Absolutely. Now, I'm glad that we have a doctor on stage because my next question revolves around coronavirus. So, did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send that to the Chinese because it was a form of punishment? Because we've been hearing that a lot from people and the reflections upon this widespread virus that's going on.
Yeah, I think you got to be careful as a Muslim. That's very theologically immature to say. One, you're basically saying this is what God wants. Like you're speaking on behalf of God when you say something like that, right? And that's very dangerous, you know. And And then also you're going to get yourself, what happens if tomorrow, anyone here ever prayed in the Prophet's mosque, right? Like during Hajj, like you went to Umrah, like right after Hajj or something like that, and you saw like hundreds of thousands of people. I remember like I prayed at the Prophet's mosque a couple of years ago, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the whole mosque was filled, okay? Hundreds of thousands of people, and the Imam is reciting. Everyone is coughing. Everyone, right? And it's always like that. It's always like that. It's a miracle outbreaks don't happen, right? It's just a miracle, right? But it could. What happens if there's an outbreak in the Prophet's mosque? Or if it starts? What are you going to say about that? That came from what? That's a punishment for what? They went to pray, they went to make Umrah. You're going to get yourself in trouble if you do that, And so Allah has a wisdom in what He does. Maybe there is a component of punishment there. Like we were talking about, subhanAllah, we're talking about how the occupation of that land had such a financial incentive for the Chinese government. And now with coronavirus, there's such a financial damage that's going on right now in the country. Law of reciprocity, right? Maybe there's something there, but don't speak on behalf of God, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wisdom, and that virus is actually, it's affecting a lot of young people, innocent people. People had absolutely nothing to do with this. People are suffering as a result of that. As Muslims, we can't be theologically immature. By the way, there is a theological point here that is related. And that is that there's a difference between what God wants and what God wills. This is really difficult to understand for a lot of people. But it's really important to understand when you're trying to figure out why evil happens, right? Especially in situations like this, right? Because it's really easy for someone in Palestine who sees his or her house demolished and their family taken advantage of to be like, okay, well, this is what God wants, so I'm gonna accept what God wants. Or the person who 20 years ago in apartheid South Africa was oppressed, right? Or you're Muslim who is being oppressed, just to look at this and be like, okay, well, this is what God wants, so I'm just going to accept it, right? But that's wrong, right? Because if you want to know what God wants, you can't look out in nature. If you want to know what God wants, you have to open the Quran. There He tells you what He wants, right? يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. God wants ease for you. He doesn't want things to be difficult for you. وَمَا اللَّهُ يُرِيدُ ظُلْمًا لِلْعِبَادِ. God doesn't want oppression, right, for His servants. What you see out in nature is what He has willed and what He allows, right? But what you have to do as a Muslim is you have to align your efforts, right? Not with what God has willed, because that's according to His infinite wisdom, right? You have to align your efforts with what He wants. So you don't have to accept any oppression, right? And just because you're in an oppressive situation or an oppressive marriage or an oppressive relationship, you don't just give up and say, well, that's what God wants. That's theological immaturity as well, right? No, what God wants is that you get out of oppression, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in a hadith Qudsi, right? Inni ja'altu dhulma muharraman bainakum, right? I have made oppression forbidden between you, and I've prohibited it for myself. So don't oppress one another. That's what God wants. So you have to act according to what God wants. And if you want to know what God wants, you have to open the Quran. And when we say Iyaka na'bud wa Iyaka nasta'een, that's what that means, right? Oh Allah, we're going to do what you want, Iyaka na'bud, right? So that you can help us with your will, Iyaka nasta'een. That's how that falls into place.
Thank you, Dr. Kia, because that was a huge hot topic issue on Muslim Twitter, so I just had to get that clarified. Appreciate that.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
So what's interesting about the coronavirus is a lot of people are talking, obviously, and I've heard things in the Uyghur community as well. One thing, like you mentioned, the law of reciprocity, subhanAllah, like a lot of what's happening as well. I'm not insinuating that this is a punishment, but I do want to point out some parallel occurrences is that, like, for example, China banned the hijab and the niqab and has been imprisoning Muslim women or Uyghur women for, you know, observing the hijab. And now the Chinese government is actually requiring everyone to walk out of their homes with masks and to cover their heads and faces. Now people are being quarantined and they're not allowed to leave their homes. They actually have to have permits in order to leave their homes because of the coronavirus. And you know, subhanAllah, you know, with what's happening in East Turkestan, people have been quarantined in these concentration camps, prisons, and actually if someone were trying to leave their home, they would also need their ID and they would be subject to massive surveillance systems in order to run a basic errand, like go to the grocery store, for example. So this is, it's just like a really, it's for us, you know, as Uyghurs, like we're just, it's eye-opening. We're like, oh my God, like a lot of what they are banning and what they were putting us through now, like they're going through, you know? So it's just like, maybe subhanAllah could be a part of, you know, I don't know, maybe like also a way for some people to realize like, oh man, this is what because a lot of, I will be honest, a lot of people within China, because the government is their only source of information, a lot of them actually support what the government is doing, and they actually think that China's efforts to get rid of terrorism, their way of trying to get rid of extremism is the correct way. And you know, maybe this could also be their, I mean, again, I don't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is willing, I mean, what the plan is behind it, but this could also be part of another, probably another way to really open up people's eyes to like how bad things can get.
Thank you for that. So we're gonna go ahead and transition to the Q&A portion of it. I'll go off some of based on the written questions that we received. And if anybody also wants to raise their hand and ask something to the speaker.
Can I ask a question too?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll wait for us to finish, but
Oh, okay. Wait.
whatever.
All right, sounds good. No worries. So I'm not even gonna lie. This is the first question that I got, and I told you Muslim Twitter was hot about it. It's the coronavirus. I told you. I'm not even lying. So we already answered that. So whoever wrote that down. Let's go ahead and let me go through this. Okay. So this might be one for Aydin, for you. Is there a way we can help through raising money? Does money matter as much as the awareness? How do we allow the awareness to speak more than what people care to advertise on media?
Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yes. How do we allow the awareness to speak more than what people care to advertise on media?
Okay. So the first question regarding money, you know what's kind of unfortunate about relief and sending money is that we cannot send money to people in East Turkestan. The reason being is that, well, number one, a lot of times we can't even contact them. And for us to wire money to them, China will actually often punish them for receiving money, claiming that they're receiving money from people who are tied with terrorist activity, and that this money is a way to fuel any type of violence against the Chinese state. And so we actually have instances in our community where actually sometimes even people in East Turkestan have sent money out to their relatives abroad, and they've, as a result, were sentenced to prison. So I know one uncle in Turkey, his sister got sentenced to 7 years in prison because she sent money out for aid to her brother. But again, but the point is, we cannot unfortunately send money openly to people in East Turkestan, and that would be a really great thing if we could, because there are also many instances of orphans and widows where their husbands are in concentration camps and now they're out working through hard labor to support themselves. But if you do want to raise money, there are also thousands of refugees around the world. There's a large concentration in Central Asia and particularly in Turkey. I've done work with refugees in Turkey and I've seen how dire the situation is. And a lot of them don't get work permits by the Turkish government, and this is something the Turkish government is still trying to work on. But you know, you have these families really suffering, going day by day. So that's one of I actually launched a good fundraiser last year to raise money. I have an organization that I would recommend you guys donating to if you guys would like to donate, and you guys can come back to me after, inshallah. But in regards to the second part of the question, how do we make awareness beyond just something that people share on social media? So again, this is where your creativity comes in, along with the list of things that I told you on the presentation. I mean, it's kind of a hard question. I try to answer it to the best of my ability. But again, making this into a conversation that we have normally. Like, don't let this conversation be something that remains in this room and you just walk out and we're like, oh my God, that was so sad. Like, let's just make dua. Like, let's try to do more than that to the best of your ability. And really start with the boycotting the good things. Like there's one guy from UCLA who started a divestment campaign at his school. He drafted this, him and the MSA drafted this really like articulate art like document, basically trying to get UCLA involved in really divesting their school from Chinese companies, Chinese institutions, and for them to issue a statement to speak up against what the government is doing. And so I would say start from here. Universities have such a large role to play. If the universities can stand up as to what's happening back home and stand up against China, China will have to respond. When I was at Duke, Duke is also it has a whole university on China in mainland China. It's called the Duke Kunshan University. And I brought up to the administration, I was like, can you guys issue a statement given what's happening, to millions of people? And they declined to comment. So again, that was their way of being complicit. And I kind of regret not doing enough while I was there. I kind of wish I was able to organize a student advocacy group on campus, kind of like how we have students, SJP for Palestine. It would be nice if we could have a similar group like that on campus for East Turkestan. And you don't have to be Uyghur in order to establish that. You could be just any person who cares about the issue. So it really starts from us using your social media as a way to raise awareness again, and going from there. So if anyone has ideas or questions, we can always talk about it, inshallah.
All right, so next question. Are there parts of East Turkestan that are not occupied where people are free?
No, unfortunately not. All of the land is controlled by China. I would say now the towns and villages, before you would find the towns, basically I'm talking about the places that are not the big cities, that kind of decades before it was probably, for example, my dad didn't grow up speaking Chinese formally. My mom, she grew up in the city and had to go to Chinese school. She went to medical school, and all of her classmates were Chinese, so she's fluent Chinese. My dad is not. So the place my dad grew up in was a place that was, majority Uyghur, and there you probably saw less Han presence, although there was some oppression. But now you see the towns and villages are now being completely wiped out. There's more overt forms of cultural genocide, where the basically now even our Uyghur script, which is in Arabic, it's an Arabic script, is being wiped out. We're not allowed to speak our own language. Again, you walk through the streets and they're basically trying to make it look like parts of mainland China. Because a lot of times when even tourists go to our region, to East Turkestan, they go there and they're like, there is no way this is China. It doesn't even look Chinese. And that's because it is not, first of all, it's not China. But when they go there, they're really shocked, and so now China's trying to erase that effort. So right now, unfortunately, there is no part of East Turkestan that's technically independent or free, but inshallah we pray for that day when everything is independent and free.
And just to follow up, are there any local Uyghur businesses that we can help us support with our money financially, or any products that we can purchase from?
Okay. Yeah. So there are organizations and businesses based in Turkey. I will say that there are certain projects that I think require a lot of funding. So it's not necessarily owned by an Uyghur, but there's something called a Xinjiang Victims Database. It's a database created by this guy named Jean Bunin. He is based in Kazakhstan. And basically what he's done is created this database to collect the testimonies of thousands of people who have missing family members. So his theory is, we're saying millions of people are in these camps, but what are the names of these people? We need to put faces to them. We need to put their names out there. We need to demand that the Chinese government release them. And so he's actually collected, I think, over 5,000 testimonies right now, and it continues to grow. But they need money because they've hired staff to translate the videos and import the material, and it takes a lot of time and energy. And he's paying them maybe $10 an hour or something. But that is money that is coming from outside support. So if you guys want to donate to that, you guys can just type in the Xinjiang Victims Database on Google. It should show up, and there'd be a way for you to donate as well. And there are more, but in businesses run by Uyghurs, unfortunately I don't have any off the top of my head. I would say if you guys go to Istanbul, there's a huge Uyghur population neighborhood there. There's a neighborhood called Zeytinburnu. there's a huge Uyghur population there where a lot of Uyghur businesses and restaurants are running, so you guys can go there. Also, there's an Uyghur restaurant here in Fairfax right near the school, Edkins, yeah. It's really good if you guys want to go there and support it, you can.
There's two actually.
There's two. There's one in DC and one on University Drive, I think. Is that? Yeah, it's called EERKINS, Edkins.
There's two in Fairfax.
Or there's two in Fairfax.
Yeah, there's one near the H Mart that used to be.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that was Edkins. I thought it was a different one.
They repeat the Turkish,
Sorry?
the Turkish area,
The Turkish area?
Yeah, the one in Istanbul you just.
where the Uyghurs are.
There's a neighborhood called Zeytinburnu, Zeytinburnu. So that's, and then there's also Sefakoy, but Zeytinburnu is like the one with the most concentrated refugees.
Cool, awesome, thank you for that. We'll take a few more questions, so please, if you have any questions you want to ask yourself, just, please interrupt me and raise your hands. Next one, how are the survivors able to leave or escape from the concentration camps?
They cannot. In some they can't. The concentration camps, I usually show a video that actually shows the interior of one of these camps, and it basically is structured like a prison. And it shows how in the entrance or exit, there's like a set of like 7 iron bars that you have to get through in order to even leave the facility. And then even outside of that building, there is barbed wire and fences and security towers. So essentially it's made that if you were to manage to escape, they would shoot you down immediately. And there was actually a story that came out maybe a year or two ago, I remember. But this guy attempted to escape a concentration camp, and in response, China sent out 85,000 security personnel or officials to basically chase down this guy. They shut down the entire city, closed down schools, hospitals, just to find this one guy who escaped. They managed to catch him, and then I think they sent him to a hospital because he was injured, and then he managed to escape the hospital, and then they just shot him dead, basically. So this is the type of response that China had with someone who tried to escape one of these camps. So the people who do manage to get out, like the people that you heard who gave it testimonies, they were able to be released because oftentimes they were citizens of other governments who happened to be unjustly detained, and their governments vouched for their release. So Mihrigul Tursun, who I showed you guys who had the triplets and one of them had passed away, she was actually a citizen of Egypt as well, and the Egyptian government basically vouched for her release, and they took her out. So yeah, but the number of people, I don't know of any person who is Uyghur and of only a Chinese, who is only a citizen of China that has been released so far.
Okay. Dr. Kia, this one's for you. So, basically asking in general, how do people within the concentration camps have hope when they're only hopeless, and how can they stay patient when they're immensely oppressed? And are they still considered believers if they decide to change the way they think?
So that's a very good question. In regards to the last point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly says in the Quran that when someone is forced, to profess something, or pressure is put on, there's actually, to determine whether someone has left Islam or not, there's several criteria you have to go through. One of the criteria is to see whether there was coercion or pressure, right? And if there is, then they're kind of like leaving is kind of overlooked or doesn't count or something like that. So in regards to that person is subject to the mercy of Allah, and that happened at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Going back to the Meccan period and lessons that we can take, people were forced to say words of disbelief. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, as long as you still have faith in your heart, it's okay. And how do they, maintain, subhanAllah, one thing that I kept thinking about, this, the situation is so similar to the Holocaust. And in the Holocaust, there was actually a guy by the name of Viktor Frankl. Anyone heard of this guy, Viktor Frankl? Anyone heard of the book, Man's Search for Meaning? No? Anyone here interested in psychotherapy? No? So Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist. He was a Jew, and he was captured and taken to a concentration camp. And one of the things that he noticed was the huge, like sudden, immediate, like levels of depression that everyone would have. And people would talk to him because he was a psychiatrist. And he realized that one of the best ways that you can get people to, come out of depression is to give them purpose. In fact, nowadays, from a medical perspective, one of the questions you ask, whether or not a person is depressed, is do you feel like you have purpose in life, right? And so he did this, and he actually survived. And when he survived, he developed this whole method of psychotherapy called logotherapy, give people purpose to treat their depression, right? And what's interesting, the reason I'm mentioning that is, if you're a believer, Allah gave you that logotherapy in the Quran. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونِ. Right? I didn't create mankind or jinn except to worship me. And on the most fundamental level, right? Just internally fighting and internally struggling and maintaining your faith. If that is your level, if that is what Allah has chosen, right, for you to show your worship of Him, then that is your purpose. That is purpose. So, like, how do they maintain? I think that one of the most important things is to maintain purpose and to maintain perspective. And but for me to sit here in this chair, right, in a situation of comfort, and try to talk about what they need to do, that's that's extremely kind of like insensitive, right? And so I can't talk on their behalf. I'm not in that situation. But, but we, as Muslims, we can make dua for them, and we can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen them and increase them in patience and have mercy on them, and to support more events like this, where we can, hear that voice given a lot better,
Thank you, Dr. Kia. That was a beautiful question, by the way. We'll end it off with one last question, and then we'll go to closing remarks. I'll give you guys a few minutes to give any concluding remarks. And I think this one's going to be specifically for you. If acts and other such efforts are successful, what do you realistically see happening? Could you see true long-lasting ability for this community to live in peace under China's colonization? P.S. Great presentation discussion. I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
So can you finish the last part of the question?
Yeah.
I missed the word you say law.
Person saying, could you see true long-lasting ability
long-lasting
for this community to live in peace under Chinese colonization?
Okay, so this is a question that kind of delves into a bit of, so this actually kind of shed light on some of the division. There's a lot of different opinions on what is an ideal situation for the Uyghur people, what is realistic. So there's like the group that say we need to regain independence because we are an occupied territory and it is our every right to be gaining independence. There won't be peace until there's justice. And when we're saying justice, we're talking about full justice. So getting back our land, for example. And a lot of the tension and a lot of the oppression is occurring because this land has been taken from us. And it's not just even about land, it's also about like the way that they're treating us in our own homeland. So the question, and so there's the group that say we need to be independent, and then there's also a group that says, if we fight for independence and we're very overt about that and we're very open about fighting for independence, then this is going to give China more of a fuel to crack down on us more, claim that we are separatists, terrorists, extremists, whatever they want to call it, and then further crack down on us. So they're saying that this can actually hurt our cause and make us oppressed more. And so when it comes to this, it's interesting. And then with that, the argument is let's just fight right now. Let's just fight for human rights and autonomy, political autonomy with the Chinese state. So like let's live try to live as like neighbors with China, like let them just, we can just live peacefully, let them, so there's kind of like a compromise there. And I think this is also a common issue that we see in other settler colonial territories. For example, I know Palestine, this is something that's often talked about, whether or not a two-state solution is good, a one-state solution is good, whether or not, like how much do you negotiate with your oppressor, and so the question was, if we, like, what do we see happening if things were to be successful, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I would like, inshallah, like as Muslims, I think we're supposed to be hopeful and continue positively. I feel like we remain in a cynical attitude, like it's not good for us even in terms of our own health. And remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all just, I think that's like the most important thing, is that if there's no justice in this life, there will be in the hereafter. But in regards to, talking about more realistic views of what's happening, I hope that inshallah one day East Turkestan will be a full independent country, and I think that is exactly what our goal is. And if we don't put that as our goal, then I feel like then, like if we're just fighting for human rights, which is, I mean, I'm trying to think like what would be the approach before the advent of human rights, because human rights is a very, modern, it's a new term and it's a new kind of a concept. But what about before human rights? So how would people fight for themselves, But given that human rights is this kind of global thing that everyone just, if you hear the term human rights violations, like what does that mean? What does human right mean, right? But in this case, like, it's really, people will argue that achieving independence is really difficult when China is such a powerful, entity, and right now even achieving independence it just seems like it will create more problems. But the issue with that, people will respond and say, right now, even when we fight for human rights, they're not giving it to us. The human rights discourse is dead and it doesn't mean anything. China themselves actually claim that human rights is a Western concept and that we do not believe in the concept of human rights. So they actually look down upon the concept. So we're like, okay, what is this human rights fight for? Like it's not achieving anything. And so the only way that we can actually achieve human rights is by governing our own territories, is by getting our land back. So that is where the theory comes from. That's where the rift kind of is. So if you kind of assess it with the community, there is some type of, a difference in opinion as to what is the best approach, or what is the most realistic and the most strategic approach. So there's a bit of I would say that is something that is not like homogenized, but I think the first step is really just sharing what the haqq is, the truth. Number one, sharing our narrative. The fact that we are in occupied territory, people don't talk about this enough. People actually call us ethnic minorities, which is actually a huge offense for us, because for the longest time we were a majority in our homeland, right? It's like calling Palestinians like ethnic minorities of Israel. It's like the same. It's almost the same thing as that. So we actually tell people, don't call us ethnic minorities. If you look online and people, thank you. He's putting up the East Turkestan flag. But if you actually look at East Turkestan. If you look at articles written about us, they claim that we're ethnic minorities, and people just think we've always been a part of China, and we're just like this like random ethnic group living, with our cool dances and food or whatnot. But the Chinese government has erased the history of us living with centuries of independence before occupation. So I think that needs to be emphasized, and whatever, and then honestly just leaving the rest of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're trying our best, whatever, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed for our land to be free. And I think I remember hearing this, you can like add to this as well, but like also this idea that like land doesn't belong to anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like we cannot claim that something is ours, everything belongs to Allah. So if we don't recognize that, then like I think that's part of the problem as well. So at the end of the day, I think most people just want to live freely, but that also comes with a deeper conversation of geopolitics, about the formation of a nation state, and I feel like that conversation could be really, really long, but I'm going to keep it at that.
No, thank you for that. Dr. Kia, did you want to give any final remarks, comments?
Just about that, like, land, it just kind of reminded me of something that, Allah says in the Quran, وَأَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةٌ, right? The earth of Allah is expansive, right? But this whole conversation really is about, kind of looking beyond borders, and caring about people who maybe you don't know their language, maybe you don't know their history, but they're a part of the ummah, right? And that should more, that aside, also they're human beings, right? I mean, of course, right? But that should make you care. And Rumi has actually a really beautiful poem in his Masnavi where he kind of sheds light on this, and he says, and maybe I'll just end it on that, where he says, Hamza bani khishio peybandi ast. He says, when you speak the same language and culture as someone, you can be close to them, right? Marbo no mahraman chon bandi ast. And when you can't, you feel distant from that person. Ey baso Hindu Turk hamzaban, ey baso do Turk chun biganagan. But he says it's interesting, you'll find a Hindu and a Turk who understand each other so well, and they don't speak the same language. And you find two Turks who speak the same language and they don't understand each other at all, right? Then he says this, "Paz zaban mahrami khud digar ast, hamdali az ham zabani behtar ast." Then it's better to speak the language of the heart than the language of the tongue, right? It's better to be of one iman than simply of one language. He says, and when you're of one iman and one of one language, there's 100,000 interpreters that let you understand someone. And so that's how we should feel here today. Maybe we don't know the language, maybe we don't know the history, but we share the same iman, right? And that there should be a strong sentiment associated with that, and it goes beyond borders, it goes beyond time, and again, the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Man la yahtamma bi amri muslimin falaysa minhum." If you don't care about what's happening to the Muslims, you're not of them, right? And so I think more than anything else, like, we should go away with that, and JazakAllah Khair to Sister Aydin, just really, really remarkable presentation, and very, very educational. And I'm so glad that not just like being a part of this panel, I'm glad I could just like watch and just like be educated and be here and be a part of this. So JazakAllah Khair.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kia. We'll go ahead and wrap up the event. I want to thank the MSA. I want to thank the board members. I want to thank the organizations and the sponsors that helped put on this event. Thank you to the brothers that helped set up the venue before, and for helping out with the Q&A session. I wanted to give my 2 cents regarding everything that I've seen. For me personally, when we look at the numbers, the 1.4 million and counting, we just look at it as a number and we see, wow, that's a massive organization, a lot of people in a concentrated area. But injustice isn't just a statistic. It's pain, it's heartache, it's grief. The families that you pointed out, just your own family that you connected and made a list out of, those are generations of people that you're connected with and are experiencing loss, or they don't even know whether they experience loss or whether they can experience hope. They're in the middle of the two. And that's just I can't conceive that. It's just such an insurmountable amount of pain to just deal with that and go through it. So I commend the people that go through it, and may Allah grant them patience, and your family and yourself patience, because that's such a heavy task to carry. It reminds me of 2017 when I saw this article where Chinese officials were taking away the prayer mounts in the books of the Quran and other related content. But little do they know that the people can perform their prayers without a prayer mat. Little do they know that the people memorize the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their heart. So when the Chinese government has asked the people to turn in these physical, things, the books, prayer mats, you might as well ask them to turn in their hearts, because that's where everything is stored, and that's where the believer truly has their faith. And when you talk about what revolutionizes society, we alluded this to what Dr. Kia mentioned in his portion of the talk. Islam is a way of life. It defines our purpose, our being. And it revolutionizes society in the span of 23 years. And that's a very small amount of time compared to the course of history when we look at empires and leaders that come and go. And the verses that were recited earlier in the program by Brother Hadis, Allah doesn't change the condition of people until they change themselves first. And we looked at it from an economic standpoint of how the land and the territory is such a prime real estate target, and that's why the oppression is occurring. But if the ideological warfare is Islam and you're trying to attack the truth will prevail eventually. Even though the enemies of the truth will come and go, they'll try to take it down and do whatever it takes to spread its propaganda and state surveillance and territory. But at the end of the day, the enemies of the truth can continue to hide and oppress, but their efforts are meaningless and wasteful. I mean, from where I come from, I'm a policy guy, so I consider that a policy failure if that's their objective. But to eradicate the truth is impossible because the truth will always prevail. And the revolutionaries are us as an ummah, that Dr. Kia mentioned earlier. The character that we uphold, the worship that we try to perfect, that's what we try to portray and hopefully spread, because we are the revolutionaries of our community, of our society. And I'll end it with this, and it's something that the enemies of the truth cannot bear. You can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. You can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. You can't kill the truth, you can't kill Islam, because that will prevail, that will truly outlast its time. So I want to thank everybody again for their time, for their comments, for their questions, for the interactions. I hope we can have more efforts that will support our Uyghur brothers and sisters in East Turkestan. And any initiatives or local businesses that you see from our Uyghur brothers and sisters, please support them. Products, merchandise, I know there's a couple food spots in the area, please go and support them and talk to them too. I know a couple families in my area, they do construction and remodeling in a home. So I try to support them as much as I can. But thank you again for all, for your comments, and I appreciate the attendance and the enthusiasm from the speakers. JazakAllah Khair. Assalamu alaikum.
One more thing. If any of you guys are interested in volunteering for our causes, if you can come up and write your name down with your email, I will be sending out an email on things that you can do specifically to help, and inshallah that would be a good way to consolidate more action items.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your closing remarks and for facilitating such an amazing discussion. I also wanted to thank everyone in the audience for attending, for making this event beneficial and worthwhile. And lastly, most importantly, I wanted to thank both of our guest speakers, Dr. Kia, who is no stranger to us, and Sister Aydin. Both of them have traveled, have taken time out of their busy schedules. So just a small token of our appreciation. And again, wanted to thank everyone. Also wanted to thank our co-sponsors, Helping Hand. We have a number of Helping Hand representatives in the audience. So please stop by. They have a table in the back. And they have an event upcoming at the end of this month. So inshallah, stop by and learn more. And inshallah, this is the first event that will be a means for us to start being more aware and giving back. JazakAllah Khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Dude, how are you in whatever class that you